And this is the November 26th, 2019 Crossplane community meeting. Let's go ahead and start with a quick check-in with where we are with releases and schedule and such. So last week during KubeCon, we put out a patch release for all of the stacks that we are currently maintaining. So GCP, AWS, Azure, and Rook, as well as a fix to the Crossplane runtime, where there is an issue that has been in the platform for a while, but had more recently come to light. And we decided to do a patch release for it because of the severity around it. So this is an issue where we were setting owner references across namespaces. Like a claim object, like a Postgres claim, was being set as the owner of a, let's say, Cloud SQL database. And in Kubernetes, owner references cannot be across namespaces. So when a garbage collection kicks in, it can unintentionally clean up resources that are still in use. So thank you, Nick. I don't think Nick's on the call, but thank you, Nick, for putting in fixes for that and getting the patch release out as well for all of those stacks during the week of KubeCon while we were here in San Diego. There is one more part of this. The stack manager itself is affected by a similar issue where the namespace stack installs the namespace stack records are set as the owners of the cluster scope CRDs that they install. So they are subject to a similar issue here, and Nick has started a pull request 1091 to fix that issue, and I will be taking that to the finish line, testing it, and make sure that it fixes the scenario, and then we'll do a patch release of core Crossplane for this as well.
Curious why we haven't seen. I'm curious if we have, or if not, why we haven't seen the garbage cleanup take place against the CRD in that situation.
So this really came to light when the week before KubeCon, when I was setting up the GitLab Auto DevOps GitLab Managed App integration demo. And I would leave it running for a couple hours at a time, let's say, and I would come back and sometimes things would be deleted. So this reproduces when the controller manager, I believe, is restarted or for whatever reason it may be. So when the controller manager comes back up, garbage collection it picks up these missing or invalid owner references. So you don't necessarily see it in shorter testing scenarios. And this largely speaks to how I would love for us to have a long haul dog fooding type of scenario set up where we have a Crossplane managing some instances that are less ephemeral and more permanent or persistent, because you don't see this issue when you're testing fixes locally with Minikube or MicroK8s or whatever it may be, because you'll clean them up and move on your way before hours pass where this might hit. So I think this speaks to a definite gap in missing a dog food or long haul type of scenario that we're running.
Cool.
Awesome. And yeah, this is great too. This speaks to the investment that we put into our release engineering, that we could get a patch out and then basically anyone on the team can run that as well. So being able to turn around fixes for issues that we find and get them out to the community quickly is really amazing that we're able to do that. So the next release that we're working to is the 0.6 timeframe. And so our monthly release schedule and cadence is still rolling right along here. We had 0.4 in the middle of October, or latest October, and then we had 0.5 right before KubeCon, so in the middle of November, and then we'll be targeting the middle of December before the holidays for a 0.6 release. I was thinking potentially targeting Wednesday, December 18th for the release and doing a feature freeze on Friday, December 13th, but those dates are not set in stone and they are subject to discussion. I'm going to quickly bring up the 0.6 roadmap. I think we need to take another pass to update this with what we're committing to or planning in 0.6. I think the broad strokes here are largely accurate, where we'll be investing in the permissions and roles and security in the stack manager. Marcus will be focusing on that and some other scenarios around the stack manager and management of like installation and observability of stacks. Template stacks is something that Susskind will continue to be investing in. Let's see what else here. Easy stacks or resource packs. That's something that Wafik and Susskind, I believe, are going to be tackling. Continuing to move APIs towards beta is something that we'll be investing in as well. Are there large efforts here that I'm blanking on that are not included in this roadmap list that we should be updating it with? Anybody?
I think Nick's working side effect resources, at least a design for that. For claims, it can have multiple managed resources.
Right. Well, Phil, you've been doing a great job of keeping the roadmap up to date. Do you want to take ownership of that and submit a PR to get the roadmap a little more up to date with our 0.6 plans?
Yeah, for sure. That sounds good.
Sweet. Thank you so much, Phil.
We should probably also.
Thing,
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, sorry. Yeah, one thing I was talking to Nick a couple of weeks ago. I thought for WES 0.6, we're having also the coverage of node pools for GKE and then similar things on other cloud providers. Is it still something you're planning to do?
Yeah, I'm actually working on that right now for GKE, and there's an issue open for that, and it's kind of just being encompassed in the V1 Beta 1 migration for GKE. So you could say it's included in that V1 Beta 1 services APIs, but it might be useful to call that out more specifically.
Thank you.
And then the other thing I was going to mention is we might want to include something on the roadmap here for the kind of like bring your own cluster and then any kind of like side effect work that happens with that. Well, I shouldn't say side effect. That's confusing with what Nick's working on. Any Kubernetes cluster provisioning, claiming stuff that goes along with that. So whatever, if we just want to call that out in some manner.
Cool.
Oh, and we have issues that are tracking that, right, Dan? Like the Kubernetes provider type of issue there that's captured a lot of that discussion and thoughts.
Yep, that's exactly right. And Phil and I are going to be working on putting together some sort of design doc to get more broader feedback on.
Right on. Awesome.
It's not on the roadmap right now, and I don't know that we have an issue tracking it, but some of the feedback that we received at KubeCon was interest in VM types. And with Packet, we have the machine instance abstraction, so maybe we could at least add to the roadmap, whether or not we have an issue tracking it, adding Google VMs, Azure VMs, and EC2 instances.
Yeah, good idea.
Cool. And that was something that you heard people talking about and asking about it while all the discussions you're in at KubeCon, Marcus?
Yeah. Cool. Either it's their existing workload or it's just that's the resource that they'd be most interested in managing. Or sometimes that's the way that they deploy their Kubernetes because they use custom options that the managed Kubernetes engines don't offer.
Cool. All right. Yeah, so Phil will follow up on updating that roadmap. Thank you, Phil. Okay, let's move on to the community topics section here. So I just wanted to call out again that since the last community meeting, GitLab 12.5 released, and that successfully included the auto DevOps integration and Crossplane as a managed app as well. So the Harishi and oh gosh, I'm so sorry, I'm blanking on the other gentleman's name that I worked very closely with over the last couple of weeks from InfraCloud. Yeah, but they did a fantastic job at as well as Steve and Phil and others at driving these changes into core GitLab to be able to now use GitLab from the GitLab experience, be able to use Crossplane to provision and manage resources in your continuous deployment flow. So that's super awesome to get that in there. And this makes the first product that is has taken a dependency on Crossplane for the experience that they're offering their customers. So this is a super cool milestone for us to be in use by something real. So that's pretty rad. Great work, everybody, on that one. Cool. So KubeCon San Diego was last week. Thank you, everybody, for coming down here to visit me. That was very kind of you. It was good to see your faces down here. Was there? I wanted to open the floor for just a few minutes here for any high-level, trends or observations or discussions that you guys had with, the community and the ecosystem there, because there was a ton of people to get to talk to. We basically all, had conversations from sunup to sundown. So I'd love for anybody to share some of the, important thoughts or observations that they made in these conversations last week.
Yeah, I mean, I already kind of brought it up briefly, but people are really interested in bringing their own Kubernetes clusters and using them with Crossplane, as well as importing existing resources. Because it's likely that many adopters of Crossplane will have some infrastructure that already is set up. And one of the big values of Crossplane, it pays off when you kind of are managing all of your infrastructure with it. And unfortunately, many organizations still have a fair number of pet infrastructure instances. And so being able to support that is something people are definitely excited about. And I think that is kind of functionality that would move Crossplane from, this is a cool thing to run some of your infrastructure with, to this is a way to manage all infrastructure in your organization. So I felt like I heard a lot of sentiment in that regard.
And that one kind of surprised me a little bit because I figured that, if people wanted to take Crossplane for a test spin or, get more comfortable with it, that they would want to use that on, ephemeral test infrastructure and just kind of get more, more confidence in it, as opposed to having it manage some of their existing stuff that maybe, is important to them, or, they have a dependency on in their environments.
Yeah, I think that it's true that if people are testing it out, that they definitely will do that. I think one of the things that deters people from even testing it out is if they're like, I'm not going to be able to manage all this stuff I already have, so what's the point in me even trying this right now? But I think if they were testing, they'd probably, not be doing importing resources first thing, because those are likely long-lived resources that they wouldn't want to mess with.
Cool. Any other thoughts people want to share? Marcus, you went off mute. I think you want to talk.
Yeah, of course I want to talk. Following up with the on-prem stuff was that people had AWS, Azure, and GCP's local clusters. I'm not sure what all the names of those products are. And that was something that I thought we may have already implemented in the way of, say, the AWS stack, maybe taking a provider API URL. But it seems like whether or not we have that now, it would be an easy enough add to do that. But then there were additional complications, like AWS's on-prem solution maybe doesn't include EKS or doesn't include the CloudFormation stacks that we're used to having exist. That was useful. I thought there were also a lot of integration opportunities. There were a lot of people approaching us about creating stacks and also using stacks for their internal deployments. So that was really encouraging. And then there were other types of integration opportunities, like places where Crossplane could just be included within an existing tool as an add-on. One of those places is MicroK8s, the Ubuntu Kubernetes distribution. I created a PR on there to suss out whether or not folks would be interested in adding Crossplane there. But the maintainer of the project, kind of gave it a pre-thumbs up at KubeCon at the booth. So I'm hoping, you know, that's the first example we can make of this.
Did you already, so that's an issue I see, Marcus, that you opened. Did you open a PR too to do that work?
I didn't match the PR yet, but it's like adding a Helm chart to a font. Like there's an add-ons directory here.
Oh,
I see. It's like there's a shell script to enable disable support, and then there's a YAML to enable to actually include when it's enabled.
Got it. So it's not like a massive integration effort at all.
Yeah.
Cool.
I'm wondering, were any, sorry to interrupt you, Marcus. Yeah, so I was wondering if you guys came up with any other sort of like booth or presentation which kind of similar to Crossplane, not necessarily competitiveness, but like how much in KubeCon it sounded like the existence of something like Crossplane. It's something that already felt in the community. Did anyone come with any similar ideas, or people had any kind of like manifestations of what they thought about Crossplane? I guess the more specific question will be, were there anything similar to Crossplane that were presented in KubeCon?
The thing that I saw that was most similar was the open service broker's ability to provision resources like MySQL from a service catalog. But then for anything that even came close to resembling Crossplane, and really for any tool that one provider offered and another provider offered something, there was always some differentiator. And for Crossplane, that differentiator over open service broker was the abstractions that we offer. So that was the main differentiator, but it was encouraging to also communicate with those communities. So we had Jonathan, I'm forgetting his last name, but he did one of the Kudo talks, or not Kudo, he did one of the open service broker talks and came to our booth, and we sort of like traded position points to understand what the tools do now and where they're different. Also on the stack side, like we've been looking at template stacks, and Kudo has some similar functionality there, if not functionality that we would really want to have already in template stacks. So that was also cool to have. I'm gonna blank on his name, but Kudo developer come over and talk to us about where they're headed with that, how they would appreciate any kind of support or development work that we could do towards that. But at the same time, these projects having their own life cycle is probably better for the overall community. Just because there's one existing implementation doesn't mean that that's the be all end all. But in general, anything just like Crossplane, no. We did have one vendor say that they might end up making something just like Crossplane though, just out of spite.
Thank you.
Yeah, and also just in general, we had like, I think like 500 flyers that we printed out for Crossplane, and they were all gone like by the end of the second day. So we had to print out a whole nother ream of flyers. And so it was just really awesome to see a ton of community interest, and it kind of really resonated with having like a more Kubernetes native way of being able to do cloud service provisioning and stuff. And so that was really good. And then just like a lot of excitement around the continuous deployment projects, and seeing the integration with Argo, seeing the integration with GitLab, and then having others come up that wanted to do a similar type of integration, or at least kind of document how they work together. So that was super cool. Then there was like a Swiss DevOps company called Vision. It's actually like embedded Crossplane in their new DevOps stack. And so, yeah, just a lot of momentum.
Were they in the KubeCon?
Were
they presenting the KubeCon?
Yeah, so the press release went out just at the same time during KubeCon. So they weren't actually at at KubeCon, they're going to be in Amsterdam.
Yeah, Phil, I want to second that observation that you made there. That people are getting pretty excited about the integration with CI/CD systems and Argo and GitLab and others that are coming down the pipeline. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again, that like all that was dependent on and predicated on the work that we did, that Javad did on reference resolving and such, that you could do a kube control apply an entire directory type of thing. Like that opened up all these scenarios, and it's like gotten the project into a position to be really useful for these interesting scenarios that people can start to do real things with their multi-cloud CD system. So I still think that took the project to another level, and we're seeing the benefits of that with people's excitement on it. So that's so awesome.
Yeah, totally. So thanks, Javad and the team, for kind of getting that put together. It's really paying dividends. So yeah.
Cool. All right, let's move ahead then.
One more KubeCon point, one throwaway point is one more tool that was doing things similar to what Crossplane does is in terms of being able to provision named resources was Kubeform, which piggybacks off of Terraform, but introduces CRDs as the way to provision resources. But the question, I had a question, which was multi-cloud con. Are videos of that going to be available anywhere online soon?
Mocha, do you know that one?
Yeah, hi, Marcus. They will be online. GitLab did record, and I will check in with them to see how we want to roll those out. So the intention there is to share those videos with folks once they're out of post-production.
Awesome. Yeah, that's gonna be great to see some of those talks and demos as well. All right, so let's just real quick, I wanted to call this out here that we started keeping a little list of all the infrastructure stacks that have been developed or are ready for consumption. So that's a little section of the README now here is links to all the 3 major cloud providers, the Rook stack, Packet stack, Cloud Scale stack. So that list will continue to keep growing, and we will update that. That's great to see that grow. So there's a link to it in the agenda document. Dan, you wanted to talk about integration tests.
Yeah, just basically saying that now the framework for implementing them is included in Crossplane runtime. So anyone who is building stacks should be able to get that functionality when they update Crossplane runtime to latest. I'm sure it'll be in the next release we cut of Crossplane runtime, obviously. And it makes it pretty easy to execute some table-driven tests, integration tests. So basically what it does is it either spins up a cluster locally, or it uses whatever the configured one is on your local machine or on your CI system or whatever. And you can actually, create resources, check their statuses, that sort of thing. So this should help us, kind of as you were talking about with like the dog food stuff. This isn't long running, but it does help us identify small bugs, and also helps us verify our examples. So another thing along with this is the like generic service examples I've been copying over to the individual stack repos. So basically we can guarantee that those are valid by running integration tests of actually creating those and making sure the status is expected. So I think this is something that will continue to build up over time in our stacks. And, it's not something that's mandatory to have everything covered, but every time we add one, we obviously have more assurance about the validity of our resources and that sort of thing. So it will be nice to have.
Yeah, protection and insulation from regressions is always a good investment, I think.
Awesome. Dan, I had a question on that. I remember we had this discussion at some point, doing the integration and actual cloud stuff, if you're doing integration on GCP or AWS, actually go and install the stack on GCP and then run stuff on it. Is it still something we're going to kind of like proceed in the future, or is it does this work contain part of that?
Yeah,
Or-
so this does work, actually provisioning resources on actual cloud providers, like actually bringing up the infrastructure. We probably also, so by default, that's what this will be doing. We probably also want to set up in the future some kind of like mocked HTTP stuff to mock the APIs so that we can run these on a more frequent basis and get some like kind of lighter weight integration tests that could potentially be run on every PR because we obviously don't want to spin up a ton of infrastructure on every PR. So right now, these are just going to be run locally, but essentially what it does is start up a manager and register your controllers with it, load the CRDs in. And so then whatever test you write will be just like you have a configured Crossplane cluster. I've actually, as I've been doing some of the V1 beta 1 work for GKE, it's kind of nice to be able to have this because you can just have a test and, you know, edit things and then run the test and it's spinning up the infrastructure for you, as opposed to having to like edit the YAML and that sort of thing.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Let's move over to PRs here. So one thing that I wanted to share with people on pull requests is that at KubeCon, we got a number of chances to talk to people that work at GitLab. And so as a 100% distributed remote team that they run, they have some interesting philosophies and take on how to stay productive, how to stay engaged, and how to collaborate as a team. And so one of the things that they mentioned to me, it was actually Dylan Griffin is the one who mentioned it to me, is that they have a shared philosophy, a shared value, maybe even, that reviewing pull requests or merge requests in their land is a top priority, basically. So when you're figuring out what you need to do, if you've got merge requests assigned to you, or you're the owner or reviewer that needs to be looking at it and providing feedback, that's a top priority because specifically it unblocks other people. So, we've had a couple discussions and retrospectives around the length of time that it takes pull requests to be approved and back and forth and such. And this cultural, shared priority of making reviewing pull requests a top priority, I think is really smart, and it can keep work moving through the pipeline. It can keep us productive, reduce frustrations, and I can personally, take some accountability here for that, and acknowledge that I have not always prioritized reviewing pull requests, as a top work item for my focus. So that's a change that I want to start making for myself and kind of build that into our culture as a community here, that reviewing pull requests is a top priority. Most of the team has been doing great with that. I know I've been a weak link in that. So I think that going forward, I'll follow the example from you all and be better at that.
Question about that, Jared.
Mm-hmm.
So Airbnb, I felt, phrased this one pretty well. Their catchphrase for this is helping others takes priority. What are your thoughts on adopting a similar catchphrase or the same?
So my mentality in general has always been has thought that it's incredibly important. There's a ton of value in supporting other people. But the way I have personally demonstrated that has been in almost every other way except reviewing pull requests, like pairing on things or answering questions or getting eyes on something or, whatever it may be. I think that enabling other people and supporting people is fantastic for so many reasons. Besides just scaling the team's capacity and ability to deliver and execute, it's got a lot of other benefits besides that. So I totally think that that's part of a culture and values that I love, that I think is important, and love to see as part of this particular community as well.
Okay. Second follow-up question. For if you, so you acknowledge that, you know, you feel like you have some role in this. For the future, what are your thoughts on how you want us to bring that up to you in a way that's supportive? Do you have any, like, do you have any preferences on that?
Well, a couple things. One thing that the GitLab folks mentioned is that they have clear ownership of merge requests. So they use the assignee field to make sure that it's always assigned to whoever has action at that point. So it's like it's assigned to, if you need review or you need feedback, then it's assigned to somebody that you want feedback from. And that's an indication to them that that's, you know, in their work queue, or that they're, you know, they are expected to be putting effort into that and providing that feedback. And then when they're done, they've given all their feedback, they can assign it back to the PR author to respond to or incorporate the feedback. So having clear ownership there is one good way to do that. Another way to answer that question is that, you know, if we adopt a philosophy of prioritization on reviewing pull requests, and that's an important thing, that, you know, if that shared value and expectation is not being met, that, you know, I can't speak for everybody, but I personally am just fine with, you know, being pinged or called out, you know, of, hey, this pull request is assigned to you, or I am expecting feedback from you. Can you please take a look? You know, to be able to get some, call some attention to it, let's say. I personally have no problem with that being done in whatever way, like a comment on the PR or a Slack message, or, you know, even more of a public sort of, hey, Jared, what, you know, you said you would look at these, why aren't you looking at these? Like, I'm okay with that personally. I can only speak for myself on that.
Okay. Yeah, because I was getting more at the second part of that. The assignee thing sounds pretty useful, so I'm going to start trying that. But I was getting more at the second part of it, because even if you feel like you have some responsibility there, if we have a standard that we agree upon as a group and we didn't say anything about it when we felt like you were doing something below that standard, then it's also on us for not saying anything to you.
Right, and that's one of the 5 dysfunctions of a team, right, Daniel? Accountability.
Yeah.
Yep. And so I believe in that. If, you know, if I'm personally not meeting a shared expectation of the team, then I you know, be held accountable.
Okay. Cool.
Cool. So I put this, I think, on the agenda last night before I responded to feedback on it. So I don't. Stephen can take a look at this and give some new thoughts on it. I don't think that we need to call that out here, so I'm just going to remove that from the agenda. And Daniel, I think you started responding to feedback on the definition of done earlier today, or maybe even during this meeting.
Oh, actually, I did not yet. But it looks like you, there were a couple of questions left, but it looks like you replied to them yesterday, I think.
Yeah. As I've adopted this new philosophy of responding to pull requests as a priority.
Okay, so I think the only thing left for that one then is I need to do something so that it passes the CI stuff. I'll probably just repeat it, and then it should be good to go.
Yeah, cool. That sounds great. Thank you.
Well, thanks.
All right. I don't see anything else on the agenda for the main topics of the meeting. So if somebody wants to bring up another topic, that's perfectly fine right now. Otherwise, we would move into the optional time section here to dive into a little bit more technical discussions, in which people are more than free to go ahead and drop off the call, and we'll get into some boring technical details. But were there any other community topics here before we got into the optional technical section? Oh, I see a chat that just came in. Okay, bye Javad, drive safe. Okay, then Dan, the floor is open to you on this topic that you wanted to bring up, and folks can drop off.
Cool. Yeah. So I put this in the optional time because this is more of like well, obviously a discussion, but more of an informational thing that I'm not requesting feedback on necessarily unless if people want to give it, but I just want to put it out there because I feel like this is a like pretty big topic and it's a pretty big like design decision. So anyway, so we've been talking about, and we got a lot of feedback at KubeCon about the ability to kind of bring your own cluster and thinking about how that would be designed, which is this issue here that Jared has up has some of the discussion around that. Kind of brought up some other questions about how Kubernetes clusters work in Crossplane at all. So if you've seen any of the demos or anything like that, a lot of times we've created Kubernetes clusters and then deployed an application into them. So kind of like at application provisioning time, we're also creating a Kubernetes cluster, which doesn't feel super realistic in an organization or in a team or something like that. Typically, you're not creating a Kubernetes cluster for every application you run, unless if you're really big on cluster as cattle kind of stuff. But even then, you're probably likely going to reuse them in some form or fashion or use them for multiple applications. So anyway, just because we do that in those demos doesn't mean that that's what we should do or that's what you have to do. You can obviously statically provision Kubernetes clusters. You could dynamically provision them ahead of time, etc. So there's a lot of different ways you can do that. Where more interesting things come in are how Kubernetes clusters are consumed, how they're different from other managed resources we support, and how they're created. So really the three main scenarios for how you'd want a Kubernetes cluster consumed in a Crossplane ecosystem would be one namespace is consuming it. So that's kind of what we're demoing when we're actually creating the Kubernetes cluster and deploying the application into it. It's like this is this one cluster for this application. You may want to have a cluster that basically all of your applications are being deployed into. So across all namespaces, or you may want some subset of the total namespaces. So right now, really only the first one is supported because in order to schedule a Kubernetes application, which if you're not familiar, likely everyone on this call is, but I'll do a brief rundown just for the recording and that sort of thing. Our Kubernetes application is our way of encapsulating Kubernetes resources that we want to be deployed into a target cluster. So right now, those are scheduled to claims using label selectors. And so you basically have to have that claim present in the namespace, which means then that managed resource is claimed. And so you're essentially limited to that one namespace. We also have the concept of the Kubernetes provider, which was created when Stack Rook was created. And we thought about using that, as you can see in this issue, to support the ability to import clusters, right? Because all you need is that secret with your kubeconfig information, essentially. And then you can use that to create a client and then deploy workloads into that. So right now, the Kubernetes provider is cluster scoped. So if we made Kubernetes applications schedulable to that, then a Kubernetes BYO cluster kind of scenario, that's suddenly available to all namespaces because Kubernetes applications can be scheduled to that cluster scope provider. So anyway, we're trying to land on a design here that supports all of those use cases and is also not incredibly complicated. And some other things we've talked about are, basically a new resource, which is like a publisher. So basically saying like for this managed Kubernetes cluster resource, whatever provider it's on, or whether I brought it myself, I can essentially publish it to namespaces. I don't really love that idea. Another option is, multiple claims, being able to claim that managed resource. That changes some things with our other managed resources, which our design right now with our controllers does not support multiple claims claiming a managed resource. there is a difference in Kubernetes clusters, managed Kubernetes offerings, or other managed services that we support. So it's not necessarily inherently bad to have a different pattern for that. And if you had multiple claims staff, then that would essentially be acting as a publisher. You could still schedule the Kubernetes applications to those claims, and just any namespace you wanted to be available to do that. Then you could create claims there, and you could basically lock down Kubernetes cluster claims with RBAC if you didn't want, non-infrastructure, non-platform team people to be able to enable that functionality. So anyway, that's kind of a short or long brain dump of what we've kind of talked about there. I just wanted to get that out there in case if anyone had strong opinions about how this should look or anything like that. We're going to be working through a design on this. We want to support that BYO cluster scenario really soon. We also want to support being able to use Kubernetes clusters across namespaces. So this is definitely something we'll be prioritizing. So if anyone in the community has strong opinions or has thoughts about what they feel like it should look like to consume a Kubernetes cluster from either an application owner side or an infrastructure owner side, then now would be a great time to present that, not necessarily here in this meeting, but now in general. So yeah, that's kind of
what were the next steps on that, Tim? Were you going to capture that in like a one-pager, or like where was that going to be captured so that feedback could be solicited?
Yeah, so Phil and I were going to put together some sort of design document, one pager, whatever. I think Phil has more of a concept of what use cases need to be supported for from an end user perspective. And I have more of this is how the API design is currently, and this is how the controllers work, and this is like what the implications of enabling that functionality would be. So hopefully we could put something together there. That being said, even prior to that, if someone or if anyone has, like strong feelings about how this should work, or, strong feelings about how it shouldn't work, then obviously that will help us drive that design. So anyway.
Definitely.
Sorry. Phil, did you have something else you were going to add?
Oh, no, just agreeing with what Dan was saying, and, feedback would be fantastic.
So a quick question that I have about this, which was something that during KubeCon, I thought I knew how something worked, but then it turned out I wasn't so sure. But in the comment just above your final comment here, point number 2, bullet 2, is in response, direct response to what Nick is saying in the previous block. Is that the case today? Can a Kubernetes application get picked up? Can it create using some sort of label selector, just pick a cluster and provision a cluster dynamically?
The Kubernetes application resource?
Yeah.
It cannot.
I think that would be a cool thing, and I think we were talking about whether or not that would be useful. And then I was thinking about how moving it to provider, a provider dependency might break the possibility of doing that in the future. But I do like the direction of this bullet number 2, and I think that would allow us to perhaps investigate that in the future, that you could just make a Kubernetes application, not really care what cluster it gets provisioned to, just use some sort of cluster label selector or cluster class label selector.
And Marcus, those are, I think those are 2 different issues there that are being conflated right now. One is like you can right now, is my understanding, Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, a Kubernetes application can influence, through a label selector, like what cluster it is scheduled to, but you use the word provisioned there, which is the conflation I'm seeing here, that a Kubernetes application won't cause a cluster to be dynamically provisioned, but it can influence what existing cluster it gets scheduled to. So that's an important distinction to make here, I think. Yeah,
and so that I think it was the second one that you pointed out, is something I thought would be a cool thing to maybe investigate in the future, and the idea of the
But
provider.
an application being able to dynamically provision a cluster for itself?
Like if I only care about the applications, I don't really care about the clusters. If I launch this application and it needs a cluster, then go make one. If it can be fulfilled by a cluster, then maybe use it. And maybe it's a little different than how things are working now, but
yeah, I definitely understand what you're saying. To be honest, I don't think that I think that's probably out of scope for this design as far as the dynamic provisioning with the Kubernetes application. I think that's something that could easily be implemented in the future, depending on how we decide that the model is. So if we're saying that, essentially you have to create well, if we land on something where Kubernetes clusters are not dynamically provisioned at all, which I don't think we will do, but I'm not saying it's out of the realm of possibility, then obviously the Kubernetes application also would not be able to dynamically provision them. And kind of our thinking at the moment is that it is more rare that you want to provision a new cluster every time you provision an application. So I think that the ability to dynamically provision a cluster with the Kubernetes application is a small use case that we may or may not support, and probably does not fit into this design, and probably would just be something we look at later down the road, because it doesn't, you could always, as we talked about, however you dynamically provision a cluster following this design, you could always do that simultaneously with your Kubernetes application. So it's just like a, slightly less YAML maybe. So that's probably something that we will not address in this design if I were to guess, but it is a cool thought though, for sure.
All right, Dan, so I'm looking forward to one pager right up there that captures everything that's been discussed here, and we can add any commentary or feedback there.
Cool.
All right, so that is everything that was in the optional bonus time discussion. So I think we can go ahead and wrap up this call for the week here then. Alrighty, thank you everybody for joining, and we will, if you're in the US, have a good Thanksgiving, and we will see you all in 2 weeks.
Thanks, Jared. Happy Tuesday.
Yeah.